Imagine, just for a moment, that everything in your life, every joy, every heartbreak, every seemingly random twist of fate wasn't random at all. What if, before you were born, you chose it all? Your parents, your spouse, even the health challenges and losses you've endured handpicked by your soul for reasons deeper than memory can reach. For many, especially in the later chapters of life, this idea is both unsettling and oddly comforting. And yet, both ancient spiritual traditions and modern science are starting to point in a surprisingly similar direction. That consciousness is not a byproduct of the brain, but something far more enduring, something that may transcend life and death. Neuroscience has made tremendous strides in the last 2 decades, especially in the field of consciousness studies. Researchers like Dr. Stuart Hameroff and Sir Roger Penrose have proposed the orchestroar theory, suggesting that consciousness originates not just from synapses, but from quantum processes within the brain's microtubules. In simple terms, this means that your awareness, your you-ness, may not be confined to this body or even this lifetime. Near-death experiences, NDEs, often dismissed in the past, are now being examined seriously. In a 2014 study published in Resuscitation, researchers found that some cardiac arrest survivors reported vivid, verifiable perceptions during periods when brain activity had flatlined. How could this be? The implications are profound. Consciousness may persist beyond clinical death. Now let's return to the idea that your soul made choices before birth. Hermetic and Eastern philosophies have long taught that the soul enters life not as a blank slate, but with a kind of curriculum, a plan tailored to growth. But what does that mean in practical terms? Imagine life as a university, and each incarnation as a course. You didn't just end up here randomly. You enrolled. You signed up for certain lessons. Perhaps to learn forgiveness by caring for someone who hurt you, or patience through a difficult marriage, or resilience through chronic illness. This isn't wishful thinking, it's a shift in perception that restores agency and purpose to your past, present, and even your pain. Consider for a moment how your life changes when you adopt this view. Suddenly, that estranged sibling, that stroke you survived, even the spouse you lost too soon, none of it is meaningless. Each experience becomes a teacher. Neuroscientifically, we know that meaning changes the way the brain processes emotion. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, observed that finding meaning in suffering transforms trauma into growth. This isn't just philosophy, it's neuroplasticity in action. When you reframe your experiences through the lens of soul evolution, your brain rewires itself toward resilience. And so, I invite you to try something radical but profoundly simple. The next time you recall a painful memory, a loss, a regret, a moment when life seemed unfair, pause and ask, what might my soul have wanted to learn here? Not as a way to deny the pain, but to give it meaning. Meaning is medicine. As we age, this becomes more than a philosophical luxury. It becomes a spiritual necessity. Many in their later years begin to sense a longing not just to understand the past, but to make peace with it, to see the mosaic of their life as something whole. This shift is not passive. It requires reflection, journaling, conversation, even guided inner work. It may mean revisiting certain moments with fresh eyes, even forgiving people who've long passed. But you're not alone in this work. Just as we now understand the brain has plasticity into our 90s, the soul too is endlessly capable of growth. And this growth doesn't stop with understanding. It leads to liberation from resentment, from regret, and ultimately, from the unconscious patterns that keep us bound to cycles of suffering. If you've ever felt a quiet sense that there's more to your story than what meets the eye, trust that instinct. It may be your soul reminding you of something you already knew before you were born. The good news is it's not too late. Not to make peace, not to grow, and not to choose differently. You are the author of this chapter, and there is power in that. So as you move forward, I encourage you, reflect on your life as if your soul had designed it. See what changes, see what softens, and most of all, see what awakens. If you've ever looked back on your life and asked, why did this happen to me? You're not alone. But what if there's a deeper, more elegant answer than chance or fate? What if life operates like a vast symphony, where every note, every moment of joy or sorrow is connected by laws as precise as gravity? Across spiritual traditions and modern science, we find a recurring theme: that free will and karma are not opposing forces but complementary currents shaping the arc of our lives. In Hermetic philosophy, karma is not a punishment but a teacher and intelligent feedback loop guiding the soul toward balance and wholeness. Imagine life as a canvas and your choices as brushstrokes. Each action, word, and even thought creates an imprint not just in the world, but in the architecture of your own consciousness. Neuroscience affirms this, showing how repeated thoughts and behaviors form neural pathways in the brain. What fires together wires together. This means that your habits, your emotions, even your beliefs, carve grooves into your biology. Karma works similarly, but on a soul level. It echoes through lifetimes, offering the soul chances to learn through contrast. Betrayal and loyalty, scarcity and generosity, fear and love. These lessons are not randomly assigned, they are tailored to the soul's evolution. Now let's bring this into focus with an example. Perhaps you've struggled with abandonment or rejection throughout life. From a karmic perspective, this pattern might reflect an ancient wound carried across incarnations, an unresolved lesson in self-worth or trust. From a scientific standpoint, this translates into attachment patterns, often shaped by early family dynamics and reinforced over time. Yet both perspectives converge on the same point. Awareness is the first step to healing. Once we become conscious of the pattern, we can begin to change it. Studies in epigenetics reveal that even our gene expression can shift based on our environment, thoughts, and choices. You are not bound by biology or destiny. You are a co-creator, sculpting your future with every present decision. The key is to observe your life not as a victim of circumstance, but as a participant in a larger unfolding narrative. In between lives, what some traditions call the interlife, the soul reviews what it has learned, what it has missed, and what it still needs to experience. This isn't fantasy. Research on past life regression, pioneered by psychiatrists like Dr. Brian Weiss and Dr. Ian Stevenson, has uncovered hundreds of cases where individuals, often children, recall details of previous lives with astonishing accuracy. Stevenson documented children who remembered names, places, and events from past lives they had no way of knowing, some of which were later verified by independent investigation. While these cases don't prove reincarnation in the clinical sense, they offer compelling evidence that consciousness may survive death and carry information beyond one lifetime. So how does this help you today, right now, in this life? Begin by viewing your recurring challenges not as curses, but as customized curriculums. The difficult coworker, the estranged child, the chronic health condition, each could be an invitation from your soul to master patience, compassion, or surrender. This doesn't mean you passively accept suffering. Quite the opposite. It means you become an active participant in transformation. Just as a physical therapist works with pain to restore movement, you work with your life experiences to restore inner alignment. Practical tools like daily reflection, writing letters you may never send, or practicing forgiveness can loosen karmic knots. You may be surprised how much light enters your life when you simply ask, "What is this trying to teach me?" Free will, in this context, is your power to respond. While karma sets the stage, your choices shape the play. Even if certain events were set in motion before you were born, your response determines whether you reinforce old patterns or create new possibilities. This is not a small idea, it is liberation in motion. You are not condemned to repeat the past. Neuroplasticity tells us the brain can change at any age, and so can the soul. If you've spent decades trapped in resentment or guilt, it's not too late to rewrite the story. Start with small, deliberate acts. A phone call you've been avoiding, a daily gratitude practice, or even sitting quietly and asking your soul what it needs. These moments become pivot points, where karma turns into dharma, where your burden transforms into your path. We are not here merely to survive, but to evolve. And each time you meet a challenge with curiosity instead of fear, each time you choose understanding over reaction, you take a step out of unconscious repetition and into conscious creation. So I ask you now, what patterns have you seen in your life? What lessons keep returning, perhaps in new disguises? And how might your soul be inviting you to grow even now? You have within you the wisdom of 1,000 lifetimes, and the freedom to choose differently starting today. There comes a time in life, often later, often after loss, when we begin to ask not just what happened to us, But why? Why did we face heartbreak instead of lasting love? Why did we battle illness while others thrived? Why did certain people appear in our lives only to hurt us? These are not trivial questions. They are doorways to deeper understanding. From a spiritual perspective, these experiences are not accidents but invitations, soul-level decisions made in a realm beyond memory, where the soul chooses to grow through contrast. The idea may sound abstract, but the science of post-traumatic growth supports it. Researchers like Dr. Richard Tedeschi and Dr. Lawrence Calhoun have documented how individuals who endure life-altering adversity often report increased inner strength, greater appreciation of life, and deeper connections with others. In other words, the very events we might wish had never happened often become the soil where our most meaningful growth occurs. Imagine your soul standing at the edge of a vast library before birth, browsing the shelves of potential lives. It doesn't just pick ease and comfort, it selects relationships that will stir something deep, events that will trigger forgotten wounds, and moments that will crack the surface of who you think you are. Why? Because growth does not happen in still water. Like the body builds muscle through resistance, the soul builds wisdom through tension. That parent who never said, "I'm proud of you," that spouse who left, that friend who betrayed you, they may have been soul companions playing hard roles in your sacred play. In fact, modern clinical hypnotherapists such as Dr. Michael Newton and Dr. Linda Backman have collected thousands of accounts from clients under deep regression who describe pre-life planning session souls gathering to design the perfect web of circumstances for growth. These narratives, though anecdotal, often carry striking similarities across clients who have never met, reinforcing the notion of a higher orchestration behind life's hardest moments. But we don't need to rely on metaphysics alone. Let's talk about neurobiology. The brain does not distinguish sharply between emotional and physical pain. A 2011 study from the University of Michigan found that social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical injury. This explains why the hurt we carry from abandonment or betrayal can feel just as real and lasting as a broken bone. But here's the hopeful part. Just as physical wounds can heal, emotional wounds can too, and often with more wisdom on the other side. The brain is plastic. It can rewire. The heart, metaphorically speaking, can expand. The ancient idea that pain holds purpose is mirrored in this modern truth. What we choose to do with our pain rewrites the story. So here is your invitation. Take one experience in your life that still feels unresolved. It could be a relationship that ended in silence, a diagnosis that changed your world, or a dream that never came true. Rather than asking, "Why did this happen to me?" try asking, "What was my soul trying to understand through this?" This shift from victimhood to inquiry is where transformation begins. You don't have to accept the pain as good, but you can allow it to be your teacher. Consider journaling your thoughts or even speaking them aloud. When we give language to pain, we loosen its grip. And when we view our stories through the lens of soul evolution, we uncover new meaning in old wounds. You may discover that your greatest sorrow is also your greatest gift to others. A woman who lost her husband young may become a source of strength for widows later in life. A man who endured childhood abuse may find himself a patient grandfather, breaking a cycle that once seemed unbreakable. These are not just poetic ideas, they are observable truths. Psychologists have long recognized the power of meaning-making in healing. Viktor Frankl, survivor of Auschwitz, wrote that those who found meaning in suffering were most likely to survive and recover. Meaning doesn't erase the pain, but it gives us a reason to keep going, and even to love again. None of this is easy. It requires courage to revisit the darkest rooms of memory and ask what wisdom might live there. It requires humility to accept that those who hurt us may have played their roles in service of our growth. And most of all, it requires self-compassion to know that you did the best you could with what you knew at the time. The soul does not demand perfection, only participation. So I ask you, gently but firmly, what if your pain was not a detour, but the path itself? What if the very things you thought disqualified you from peace were your credentials for inner freedom? Start small. Write the letter you never sent. Visit the place you've been avoiding. Light a candle and say their name, even if it still stings. Each act of healing, however modest, clears space for the soul to breathe. And as you do this, something remarkable may begin to happen. The burden doesn't disappear, but it lightens. The pain doesn't vanish, but it no longer defines you. What defines you now is your willingness to grow, your openness to mystery, and your courage to see even your wounds as sacred steps in a journey your soul once chose and still chooses to walk. There is a quiet longing that often grows stronger with age, not just to be free from pain or regret, but to be free in the deepest sense of the word. Free from the heavy layers of fear, attachment, and confusion that have accumulated over a lifetime. Many people in their later years begin to feel a subtle call, like an echo from someplace familiar yet forgotten, pulling them inward towards something more enduring than success or survival. This is the beginning of liberation, not an escape from life, but a transcendence of illusion. Ancient philosophies, especially from Hermetic and Eastern traditions, describe this process as the soul awakening to its divine nature, recognizing itself not as a collection of roles or stories, but as a spark of infinite consciousness. Yet this awakening is not just mystical poetry. It's mirrored in scientific research on brain states, mindfulness, and human well-being. Neuroscientists have found that long-term meditators, including elderly practitioners, show significantly increased activity in the prefrontal cortex and decreased activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center. In practical terms, this means that consistent spiritual practice rewires the brain for calm, clarity, and compassion, qualities long associated with what traditions call enlightenment. But how do we actually walk this path in daily life? The answer is surprisingly simple, though not always easy. It begins with awareness, becoming the gentle observer of your own mind. Every time you notice a negative thought without feeding it, every time you feel anger but choose not to act on it, you weaken the grip of the unconscious patterns that bind the soul to repetition. This practice has both spiritual and neurological consequences. Dr. Daniel Siegel, a leading expert in interpersonal neurobiology, emphasizes that where attention goes, neural firing flows. In other words, what we pay attention to becomes our reality. If we focus on resentment, we deepen those neural grooves. But if we focus on presence, compassion, or forgiveness, we literally reshape the architecture of our brain and, arguably, of our karmic field. To live in this way is not to withdraw from the world, but to engage it from a place of inner steadiness. Imagine walking through a storm without being blown by the wind. That is the power of detachment, not indifference, but grounded freedom. The Bhagavad Gita calls it acting without attachment to outcome, and in modern psychology, we see this mirrored in practices like acceptance and commitment therapy, which teaches that we can take meaningful action even in the presence of fear or uncertainty. Aging offers a unique opportunity to master this, because we've lived long enough to know that we cannot control everything and, more importantly, we don't need to. Begin by practicing small, daily acts of release. The next time someone irritates you, see if you can respond with curiosity instead of reaction. The next time you feel the urge to control a situation or outcome, pause and ask, what happens if I trust? These moments become gateways. Each time you choose stillness over drama, compassion over blame, or presence over projection, you raise your energetic frequency, something long emphasized in both spiritual teaching and now supported by emerging studies in biofield science. Though the field is still young, researchers such as Dr. Beverly Rubik have explored how subtle energy systems in the body respond to intention, emotion, and meditation. Your energy, in essence, is not fixed. It is fluid, and your choices shape its resonance. Perhaps the most profound step on the path to liberation is learning to see through the illusion of separation. This is not just a philosophical idea, it is a shift in perception that changes everything. When you begin to feel that you are not just in the universe, but of it, that the same life moving through the trees and oceans and stars moves through you, you realize that the soul was never really lost. It was only dreaming of being separate. This realization often arises not through effort, but through surrender. A quiet moment in nature, a deep breath on the porch at sunset, the laughter of a grandchild, these simple experiences can open portals to a sense of belonging so vast that it cannot be explained, only lived. If you've ever felt that you were meant for something greater, not in the worldly sense but in the sacred sense, that intuition is not an illusion, it is a memory of your soul's true nature. And the good news is, it's not too late. Liberation is not reserved for monks or mystics. It is available to anyone who chooses to wake up moment by moment, thought by thought, breath by breath. You don't need to travel far or become someone else. You simply need to return gently and honestly to who you already are underneath the layers. So today, I invite you. Sit quietly for 5 minutes and ask yourself, what am I still holding on to that no longer serves me? Then imagine placing it down like a heavy coat. Breathe into the space it leaves behind. Do this not once, but often. Let it become a rhythm, a new way of being. Liberation doesn't happen in an instant. It happens across hundreds of small, sacred decisions. And you, just as you are, have everything you need to begin. There is a moment, often late in life, when the soul no longer seeks just answers it seeks to serve. Not from obligation, but from a deep, quiet knowing that what we've learned must now be shared. It's the wisdom of the elder, the teacher, the guide who no longer needs to control the world, but who chooses to light the path for others. Across spiritual traditions and philosophical systems, the final stage of the soul's journey is not isolation, it's contribution. In Hinduism, this stage is called sannyasa, where the focus turns away from worldly ambition towards selfless offering. In Buddhism, enlightened beings known as bodhisattvas return not out of karma, but compassion. Even in Christian mysticism, we find the concept of the wounded healer, those who have suffered deeply, and through that suffering, become capable of great love. And science, too, supports this archetype. Studies in gerontology show that older adults who engage in purposeful, altruistic activities, whether mentoring, volunteering, or caregiving, experience increased mental health, reduced depression, and greater life satisfaction. Purpose, it turns out, is medicine. What you've lived through matters, not just to you, but to someone else who is walking a path you've already traveled. Think of your life as a lantern. Each trial you've survived, each lesson you've learned, adds oil to that flame. And now, more than ever, the world needs your light. We live in a time of great noise and confusion, where many younger souls feel lost, overwhelmed, disconnected. Your story, told not from ego, but from authenticity, could be the bridge someone needs to cross their own river of doubt. You don't need to be a scholar or a saint. You simply need to be honest. Real stories change lives more than perfect philosophies ever could. Consider the lives of those who chose to return and serve after awakening. The Buddha, who after his enlightenment, spent decades walking barefoot through villages teaching the middle path. Jesus, who embraced the sick and the outcast, embodying love even in the face of death. These were not distant deities, they were humans who became radiant because they lived their truth without attachment. Modern-day parallels exist too. Look at people like Dr. Edith Eger, a Holocaust survivor who became a psychologist and now helps trauma survivors rediscover hope. Or Ram Dass, who after suffering a stroke that left him partially paralyzed, called it fierce grace and continued to teach love and presence from his wheelchair. Their lives show us that the final act is not about retreating, but about becoming a beacon, not despite our wounds, but because of them. Science adds its own confirmation. Research on intergenerational wisdom sharing reveals that when older adults share life experiences with younger generations, both parties benefit. The elders experience increased neural stimulation and emotional fulfillment. The youth gain perspective, resilience, and a sense of continuity. It's not about preaching, it's about presence. Sitting with someone, looking them in the eyes and saying, "I've been there, and I made it through," carries more power than we can measure. If you've raised a child, rebuilt after loss, lived through war, or simply endured the quiet ache of being human for over 6 decades, you have something sacred to offer. And now is the time. So how do you begin? You don't need a platform. Start with a conversation. Call a grandchild and ask them about their fears and dreams. Write a letter to your younger self and share it with someone just starting out. Record your stories, not just the polished ones, but the messy, meaningful ones. Volunteer your time or even just your listening ear. A study from Carnegie Mellon University found that adults over 60 who volunteered regularly had reduced hypertension and longer life expectancy. The act of giving literally heals the body as well as the soul. And even if you're physically limited, your presence, your prayers, Your words, these are potent forces in a world starving for wisdom. You are not at the end. You are at the summit. From here, you can see more clearly, and from here, you can offer guidance not out of superiority but humility. The path to liberation does not end in stillness, it circles back in service. And when we give not from depletion but from overflow, we become channels of something far greater than ourselves. So I invite you, gently and boldly, let your life bless others. Let your pain become someone's medicine. Let your love outlive your name. In doing so, you complete the journey your soul began long before this lifetime with grace, with purpose, and with light that only grows stronger as it is shared.